Good evening. Today we're going to be going over a very heavy topic, and that is eugenics. So the history of eugenics is a little muddy, as the ideas originate in ancient Greece, but became popularized by Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's half-cousin, who invented the word eugenics. According to the Oxford Dictionary, eugenics is defined as the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Developed largely by Sir Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race, eugenics was increasingly discredited as unscientific and racially biased during the 20th century, especially after the adoption of its doctrines by the Nazis in order to justify their treatment of Jews, disabled people, and other minority groups. And while, yes, everybody knows who the Nazis are, as they are the most popular example of eugenics in action, believe it or not, Hitler actually took inspiration from the American eugenics movement, which had policies implemented as early as 1907. To prove it, I'll read an excerpt from The History of Eugenics in the United States on Wikipedia. In 1907, Indiana passed the first eugenics-based compulsory sterilization law in the world. 30 U.S. states would soon follow their lead. Although the law was overturned by the Indiana Supreme Court in 1921, in the 1927 case Buck v. Bell, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Virginia Sterilization Act of 1924, allowing for the compulsory sterilization of patients of state mental institutions. So, yes, those very things of sterilizing disabled people in institutions was practiced by Hitler many years later, as well as murdering them. So, if you got someone to blame the Americans for where Hitler's ideas came from. Now you're probably wondering, well, that was in the past. How does that affect autistic people today? Well, I'll tell you from this article written by Howland Crow called Pity Party for the Pity Puppy. Now, although I say autistic, these ideas also affect all other disabled communities. Now, let me read you a few excerpts. He uses SIA as an analogy for how eugenics affects us. Just a warning, there will be a lot of racist and ableist language throughout to depict the effects of eugenics. So here we go. Like the symbolism of rats and apes, which are racist stereotypes for Jewish people and black people, the puzzle piece being the primary symbol for autistics sums up what our root narrative is. Perpetual children who suffer, and through our suffering, inspire people who aren't us to feel good about themselves. It's how nonprofits like Autism Speaks could promote themselves on fighting on our behalf, while at the same time using words like disease to describe our conditions, and wonder why the only autistic person on their advisory board resigned in 2013. Autism Speaks didn't remove the word cure from their mission statement until 2016. That's why Sia's film music couldn't have been saved, even if an autistic actress were cast as the title character. The puzzle piece in the root narrative of people with physical or mental disabilities and disorders as pity puppies, who will never grow up, their conditions as burdensome diseases that must be cured from, and who only exist as inspiration porn for normal people to feel good about themselves, both beg the question. What if we're perfectly fine the way we are and don't want to be cured? What if we decide there's nothing wrong with us? This finally brings us full circle back to eugenics. Now, just a correction. There is an autistic person on their board of directors, Stephen Shore, who is still there today. In many cases, for people with physical or mental disorders and disabilities, it is our own parents who have been our worst enemies. In 1939, a German boy known for 68 years only as Child K was born blind and with missing limbs. The family's personal physician, Karl Brandt, also referred to the baby as an idiot, which at the time was a technical term for someone with a profound intellectual disability. It wasn't until the 2007 book Karl Brandt, The Nazi Doctor, that the boy's name was revealed on pages 118 through 122 to be Gerhard Kretschmar. Kretschmar's parents begged doctors to put him to sleep. Being that this was illegal at the time, Kretschmar's father wrote personally to Adolf Hitler to overrule the law that forbade doctors from killing this monster, and Hitler did. The boy lived for only 5 months before he was murdered by lethal injection. And to the left is a picture of Adolf Hitler's 1939 order for Action T4, a program for mass murder by involuntary euthanasia of anyone deemed incurably sick, with the letter being written in German. Hans Asperger was an Austrian pediatrician and medical theorist whose work has been lauded around the world since his death in 1980. He was a pioneer in the fields of child psychiatry and pediatrics, particularly his work on what would become known as Asperger's syndrome, before that diagnosis was merged into autism spectrum disorder by the APA in 2013. He was also a eugenicist and a Nazi collaborator. In 2018, the book Asperger's Children and an article from Molecular Autism revealed the extent of Asperger's complicity with the Nazi regime. Asperger was known to visit the Am Spiegelgrund clinic in Vienna to observe children for study. In his 1944 doctoral thesis, The Autistic Psychopaths in Childhood, he championed children with milder challenges as geniuses. For those considered low functioning, whom he deemed incapable of functioning outside of institutions, he referred them to the clinic. While Asperger's writings make no outright requests or demands for children to be euthanized, he was certainly aware of the poor conditions at the clinic. If children didn't clip their nails or make their beds properly, they were forced to do push-ups as punishment. Nurses often let children starve by withholding meals. If they vomited, they were forced to eat their own vomit. Bedwetters were publicly humiliated and forced to line up in front of the other children. Any children who survived came out of the clinic with severe trauma. And to the top left is a picture of Dr. Hans Asperger with the young patient, photo undated. Asperger downplayed and hid his cooperation with the Nazis during his lifetime, leading authors such as Uta Frith to bolster the claim that Asperger defended his patients against the Nazi regime at great personal risk, when the exact opposite was true. Asperger boasted of having a benevolent attitude towards his patients, yet no contemporary evidence of this exists. When Asperger referred a 2-year-old child named Herta Schreiber to be held at Spiegelgrund for encephalitis, he deemed her incurable and said she must be an unbearable burden to her mother. Schreiber died of pneumonia while at Spiegelgrund one day after her 3rd birthday. 789 children were murdered at Am Spiegelgrund under the Nazi regime. Others were subjected to unethical medical experiments. The brains of the murdered children were preserved in jars and remained in the basement of the clinic until they were finally buried in 2002. And to the left is a picture of Herta Schreiber crying in 1941. When I was younger and started to accept the fact that I was autistic, I would sometimes proudly call myself an Aspie as a personal act of defiance. It was a common word among those diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome to use as a personal identifier. I don't call myself that anymore. It would not be an overstatement in the slightest to say these revelations about the man who pioneered research on people like me led to something of a serious identity crisis for me. I felt a blinding hatred for neurotypicals I never imagined I'd feel. It wasn't just that Asperger sent children who were just like my little brother and I to die, hungry and alone, and for their body parts to be kept as medical trophies on shelves. It was that he spent the rest of his life painting himself as a hero for autistics and patting himself on the fucking back for it. So, when Sia gets pissy with autistic critics of her film, wondering why we're so angry, despite all her supposed good intentions she keeps congratulating herself for, this entire explanation is why. We are tired of these fucking movies. Autistics, and generally anyone with some type of disability or disorder, are tired of our trauma being inspiration porn so neurotypicals can learn to be better people. Since the only black character in Sia's movie appears to be either a token friend or a caretaker/therapist, I don't blame black autistics for being tired of movies about autism acting like they don't exist, especially considering people who are black and autistic have more reason to fear police than most people. They have every right to be angry. And yes, I myself reject the label of Asperger's for myself for similar reasons, because with Hans Asperger and what he did by protecting the low support needs people and condemning the high support needs ones, it paints the idea that some autistics are superior to others, and I can't get behind that, because to me personally, all autistics are equal and all deserve the same amount of love and respect. And for those who personally identify as Asperger's, that's your choice, but I personally just don't do that. Furthermore, the fact that Sia is angry at us for judging her film based on a trailer is laughable, considering she shared it on her YouTube channel. Trailers aren't always some separate entity from the film itself. They are a marketing tool designed to get an audience interested in seeing a film. When I see a trailer for Godzilla, I'm expecting Godzilla to show up. When audiences saw the trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog last year and loudly complained about the atrocious CGI designs of Sonic, the creators didn't ask fans to withhold judgment until watching the film. They fixed Sonic's design. Likewise, when I watched the trailer for Green Book, my first thought was, this is going to be like Driving Miss Daisy, where a patient black man has to teach a white person to be less racist, isn't it? Did the actual film do anything to subvert that expectation given to me by the trailer? Nope. Godzilla was promised, and Godzilla is what we got. The reason why Sia's film, and especially her callous words in defense of it, hurt us is because we know how that root narrative comes from eugenics, and we know where that narrative leads. If our narrative is that we are perpetual children whose struggle and trauma can motivate the character growth of those who are supposed to be our loved ones and guardians, what happens if it isn't the feel-good narrative it is in the movies? Struggle then becomes burden. Because when we refuse to be pitied, refuse to remain children, and refuse to maintain a facade of innocence, then we can speak for ourselves. Then all the pats on the back vanish, and the world is forced to finally deal with us. Now remember that last paragraph, because that is a very important one. That feel-good narrative about us can just as easily be twisted against us the moment our caretakers and loved ones decide we're not grateful enough. Then they resent us. That's when they stop telling each other wonderful stories about how good helping us made them feel, and start withholding our meals, locking us in closets or cages, or even beating us and murdering us. What Sia, and by extension all those who consider themselves mentally or physically normal, doesn't understand is that we don't owe her our gratitude for making a movie about us. We want a voice at the table. We have voices. We're not pity puppies. We're not children. We're not helpless. Being unable to do some things doesn't mean we're incapable of doing anything. And when these narratives of struggle vanish, what people like Sia and Asperger are ultimately left with is all that rewarding work no longer being rewarding and slowly becoming work. It has no end in sight. There is no gold sticker for helping us. Our condition just becomes life. And yeah, I think that's probably their biggest fear, is not getting a reward or incentive for it. Almost as if they're afraid of us having the same rights. And now, of course, not all parents think this way. There are many who are amazing, but as evidenced by the Disability Day Mourning Vigil every year that is sponsored by the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, there are indeed some parents out there who do kill and starve their kids. So people need to be aware of that because of eugenics and ableism. At the end of the day, I think that's what the neurodiversity movement is all about. Having a seat at the table, right? Hashtag nothing about us without us. So we're going to revisit Autism Speaks' infamous eugenicist documentary, Sounding the Alarm. Let's get started. So before the documentary even begins, it gives you numbers and statistics of how high the prevalence rate of autism is, implying that it's a bad thing because paired with the somber music, it has a very negative tone to it, like the existence of autistic people is a bad thing, undesirable.
These are families who are doing what we ask families to do. They're buying health insurance to take care of their children in case of an unforeseen medical disaster. And that's what autism is. It's an unforeseen and unprovoked medical disaster. And I just could not for the life of me understand why, because the diagnosis happened to be autism, the health insurance that you've been paying for your whole life didn't step in and help when you needed help. There is a huge autism tsunami that is going to hit the state budgets of all of our states if they don't take steps to ensure that the kids are getting treatment. A study came out of Harvard a few years ago that projected the lifetime societal cost for a child with autism who doesn't get the treatment they need is over $3 million. It was $3.2 million when the study came out a few years ago. If you take $3.2 million and multiply that times 1 in 88 children, which is the current prevalence statistic from the CDC, that is a huge amount of money. And in talking to state legislators, that's kind of what makes the light bulb go off for them.
Wow. I'm glad to know that I and the rest of us are an unforeseen medical disaster. Tell me, Laura Unum, do you happen to wear this as a pin in your off time, besides that puzzle piece? Now, she also says in other parts of the documentary about trying to pass ABA in multiple states to get covered by insurance. And I think that is what is factoring into all that money. So, ABA, as you know, is not something that we need, because a lot of those behaviors that they're trying to eliminate come from difficulties in us communicating, which can be fixed through occupational and speech therapy. ABA is also traumatic, and 46% of people have experienced PTSD from it, thanks to the study done by Henny Kupferstein. So those costs would be way down, because at the end of the day, autistic people are just human beings.
It takes your bank account and, you know.
We've had to move into a smaller rental home, give up one of our cars, give up our personal health insurance. My mother-in-law has had to step in and help us with mortgage or rent payments.
No! No!
If you start the day off in a meltdown, then basically the day just progressively gets worse and worse and worse. You want to start the day off without meltdowns. Otherwise, it's a living hell for all of us. Every minute of the day is a strain in 50 different areas. We can't just simply, when people call us on the phone, oh, come on over, we're having a get-together. Nope. Hey, come on out to dinner. Nope. And people start to think, you know, eventually they all go away.
So that was Dan Spitz from Anthrax, good band, and his ex-wife, who they actually divorced the year after this documentary came out in 2014. So it begs the question, where else was the money going? Because apparently that divorce had to have been quite expensive. So how dare you blame your children for all those expenses? Also in 2009, Spitz had to have an emergency bypass surgery on his heart, which that couldn't have been cheap because American healthcare. So no, they're just dicks for blaming their kids for all their expenses when that's not the case. Plus, they're wasting on ABA, so not a very strong argument there. Dan Spitz is almost implying that those meltdowns happen for no reason. My guess is some of those meltdowns could have probably come from the divorce. I'm sure they were aware of all the fighting going on and that caused distress in the kids. That could definitely be a factor. So obviously he is doing something wrong if they keep having meltdowns. We don't just have meltdowns because we feel like it. It's because we're distressed or our needs are not being met. So you're obviously doing something wrong. Also, if your friends don't want to hang out with you because of your kids, then you need to get different friends, man. I mean, that's just discrimination right there. If they can't accept your children for who they are, you need to leave them or get in their face and yell at them, because that's not right. Like, why can't your kids go with you out with them? Like, I'm sure their friends probably have kids, right?
I do think there might be a genetic predisposition, but there certainly must be an environmental trigger, because there's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. And we have an epidemic now.
I don't even think she knows what an epidemic means. If you look at the dictionary, it says a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at any particular time. So note the word infectious. That means it infects people. Autism is not like that. It is not infectious. It's passed down genetically. There's a difference. And besides, it's not an epidemic because people like us have always existed. I think she just does not want us to exist because she's a bigot.
Kent is very high functioning, and he does not have the outward appearance of looking as though he has any issues, but he's really functioning at a point of a 12 to 13-year-old.
I got a real problem with mental age because it gives parents an excuse to treat their child like they're younger than they actually are. Like if they're 17, you treat them like they're 17. Because otherwise you're just robbing them of their rights. Like you can't just judge someone just based on how they act. If they are a certain age, you need to treat them like the age that they actually are. If they're 30, treat them like they're 30. If they're 5, treat them like a 5-year-old. If they are 50, you treat them like they're 50.
Young people who have severe disabilities, when they age out of the school system, they will be picked up by a state agency who will provide support. However, young people who are at a higher functioning level, like Kent, are kids we describe as falling through the cracks and may not have eligibility for those services, which could make all the difference in their life.
That is a great point. People like Kent who are low support needs definitely deserve services after they got out of school too. Maybe if Autism Speaks spent more than 1% of their budget on services instead of on their awareness campaigns or on research, then maybe it would make a difference for him and others.
There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people like Ken. And if we don't prepare as a society for them, then they're not going to be the contributors to this country and to other countries that they could be.
Why does it matter what they can or can't contribute? Is that all the worth that they have? Is the amount of capitalistic value they can produce? Like, is that all we exist for, to be cash cows?
I want to thank you, John, for coming here today and doing some filming of me and my girlfriend as well. And I hope that it very pleased you very well.
I thought it was worth showing that clip because just listen to the words Kent is saying. I hope I pleased you very well. Now, autistic people are very often focused on trying to please those around us, often to our detriment, because we are usually very hyper empathetic and we notice when people around us are in distress. We may not always know why, but we're very focused on pleasing those people and making them happy, even if we don't show it in conventional ways. And it seems like Kent is a very good guy and has always been focused on doing that, and he just was not recognized for it, because throughout that portion of the documentary they're going on about how he should be all productive and all that. But even if he doesn't work, he still should be recognized, because overall he's just a good human being. So Kent, if you ever get to watch this, I support you. Now, just a warning for the next clip. There's a meltdown video and the parents explain aggressive episodes of the son, so just a fair warning ahead of time.
It got to the point where it would take him 3 hours to eat his supper because he would OCD on the food. It was very hard to manage. If you tried to move him along, he would get anxious and he would get aggressive sometimes.
His anger is really directed towards himself because he can't tell me, I don't want you to do that, or I don't need you to do that. And he can't verbalize that.
He would start to slap at me. He would try to dig his fingernails into my arms and my biceps.
He tries to throw me down the stairs. So, had Jim not intervened a few times, or I hadn't been able to grab the rail, he would have thrown me down the stairs.
I bought the protective stuff like the police officers wear, and I wear arm sleeves that protect my arms and my hands when I move them from room to room. And we keep his fingernails cut very short, obviously, because that's a weapon that he has, Not that he means to use it as a weapon, but unfortunately that's the way it is.
So as you saw from that, the meltdown video was incredibly undignifying because his shirt was off and he was on the toilet. Like, why would you shoot a video like that and put that for a mass audience to see? And second of all, the parents talk about him attacking them with his nails like a weapon and then saying that he didn't mean to use it that way, which you can tell from that the father has empathy for his son. So that's definitely worth pointing out. And I could tell that probably, this is just speculation here, but something tells me that they might have edited out any portions where they talk about the son in a positive light, because his entire portion of the documentary just paints him like a monster, as you saw, like a burden, because after all, this is a pro-eugenics video.
There's no places for him really in this state away from us that we would consider safe. We worry about him being abused sexually, physically, verbally, because we wouldn't be there and Drew would be unable to tell us if he's being abused. And also, he's so complex that many places would not know how to care for him properly.
Yeah, we fear that he would just be
Left alone and
put in a bedroom, drugged, and left alone.
I want my son to be happy. If they don't find a cure, I at least want him to be autistic and happy.
So that is a very understandable concern from the parents, that Drew will be abused in a home if he was sent there. So that begs the question, why isn't Autism Speaks fighting for better background checks on home resident employees and paying them more so that way they have more incentive to treat the residents better? Nobody ever questions that. It's always about just all these cures. But there are autistic people living now. Why aren't you finding out how you can help them now instead of trying to prevent future generations of us from being born? Why do the people living have to suffer? Then again, no autistic person should suffer in the future or today. So, these are questions that they should be answering. And although the mother was talking about a cure, which is offensive, she did also say that if the cure wasn't found, she would like him to at least be autistic and happy, which is a good thing. I think any good parent would just want their children to be happy more than anything else. But Autism Speaks is not the right people to go to for that if you want your children to be happy. If you want your children to be happy, it would probably be better to go to autistic-led organizations like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, because nobody knows autistic people better than autistic people.
Okay, so
You're her mom. You intend to care for Sochi indefinitely?
I'd like not to, but I know the state of New York has put a moratorium on adult homes for children like her, so we're just managing from day to day.
That hit close to home because my parents got tired of helping me and kicked me out of the house, trying to pretend that my disability didn't exist. So I feel bad for that girl's mom by saying that she didn't want to take care of her. If you're a parent, sometimes that's just what happens. You take care of them till you pass on. Some people are just disabled and that's what happens. If I had children and they were intellectually disabled or something and needed to be taken care of even to old age, I wouldn't resent my child at all. I chose to have the child and that is my responsibility. So it's very hard to hear something like that.
I've had moms tell me, there is no way I can put my child into a group home because most days I want to kill him. And I love him. I love him more than anything in the world. I love him more than life itself. So if I feel that way, how is someone making $12 an hour going to have the ability to have the empathy and the patience to take care of my child? And he can't tell me if someone's abusing him. And so how would I know? How can I trust that?
So I'm not sure whether to take that statement about killing him literally or if she's just being playful due to the tone she's using. You decide. But also, it is understandable about getting respite care and him not telling her about if he's abused or not, and with the employees getting paid $12 an hour. But as I said before, why aren't these workers getting paid more? Why aren't they getting paid a wage that they deserve? Autism Speaks, again, never answers that question. They just let things stay the way they are. Just another meltdown video warning again for this next clip.
Thank you. I'm Jamie from Nettie.
The Bianco family is the classic reason why our services are needed. Just challenging behaviors that just the family dynamic is not able to handle on their own. Matthew has Down syndrome, he has autism, he's very self-injurious.
We're really looking to have the medications changed because lately he's just been not a nice little man. And his sleeping is horrible.
Especially since he doesn't communicate. I mean, communication is a root of a lot of the problems.
Right. A lot of times we do proactive day respite. I'll pick up at 9 and drop off at 3. Try to do 1 or 2 days a week just to give the family, because we know it's hard to have someone home all day long.
I feel like I'm failing as a mother because I can't help him. I know his wants, I know his needs, but he needs to be with professionals that can help him around the clock.
Good stuff,
He thinks vegetables are snacks.
We'll see you later, buddy, all right? We'll see you soon.
That's the matter.
Bye-bye.
I do feel bad for that guy who's Down syndrome and autistic, and he's obviously in distress because his mother is leaving him in a group home, and he's aware of that. I can understand the mother's concern with him needing more help than he's getting. So why, instead of bringing him to a group home, why isn't Medicaid funding for support workers to come to his home so that way he could still be in his natural environment but also be cared for like he needs to? This is very excessive, and you're making the kid look like the bad guy because his mother's leaving him behind. I mean, come on.
The molecule we're working with is called...
Look, scientists are trying to do our part in a very challenging situation. We haven't figured out the cause yet, and we have no idea why people with autism don't talk, and we haven't figured out highly effective treatments. We can't reverse it, but we're trying.
This will be very, very similar to what we do in the autistic patients.
The project that Jacob and I are collaborating on is back to this idea of neuroinflammation in the brain. So in autism, it's never been shown in a living person that there's an abnormality in their body that you can detect and that you could see change with treatment. So Jacob has developed a marker of brain inflammation.
So this is where it gets even worse. Notice how he talks about autistic people don't have an abnormality in their body that can be detected. So why are you messing with our genomes then? What are you trying to find? What are you going to do when you find this cause? What will happen then? Will non-speaking people just never be born again? You never definitively say what you would do in terms of treatments for when that is discovered. That is the scariest part, is the vagueness of what they would do. These guys have so much power behind them in their research that if they were evil, very horrible things would happen with that research. And that's what scares me most. And it should scare others as well.
About 12% of women who have children with autism have peculiar antibodies that are directed to the fetal brain. And this has raised the possibility that these antibodies actually could be causing the autism in a subset of children with autism. And so how do you prove that?
So this is the animal number 2. The one
with my collaborators here at the Mind Institute, we've actually taken antibodies from moms who've had children with autism. And we actually work in the non-human primate, the rhesus monkey, because we think that that's the best model system for evaluating autism.
So this is the brain of a rhesus monkey.
In short, what we do is we take, again, the antibodies from the moms, we inject them into pregnant rhesus monkeys at different times during their pregnancy. We allow the animal to be born, and then we study the offspring for actually several years. What we have shown is that the animals that were treated with the antibodies from the moms who had children with autism show autistic-like behavior. So they show social impairments. In some studies, we've shown that they actually show repetitive behaviors.
So this is the monkey that was treated with the antibodies from a human mom that had a child with autism. And again, doing these repetitive backflips is unusual. It's abnormal. And we studied these monkeys not only in this situation, but we studied them when they were by themselves. We studied them when they were with monkeys they didn't know. And in all cases, they showed these increased repetitive behaviors.
If, in fact, we go on to prove that these antibodies are causing this form of autism, we would be able to screen women to see whether they have these antibodies and then do a medical intervention to try and eliminate those antibodies or to at least make them non-functional.
Okay, so there is a lot to unpack in this video here. You can't get more explicit than talking about trying to turn off the antibodies in the mothers so that way an autistic child is not born. That's despicable. We need autistic people. Believe it or not, on January 25th of this year, the UC Davis Mind Institute came out with an article saying biomarkers in mother's plasma could aid in early autism diagnosis and intervention. And I'm going to read to you a part of that article where they say, we can envision that a woman could have a blood test for these antibodies prior to getting pregnant. If she had them, she'd know she would be at a very high risk of having a child with autism. If not, she has a 43% lower chance of having a child with autism as MAR autism is ruled out, Van de Water said. So, yeah, now they're trying to get it to where they can detect autism before the parents even conceive. So that way it enables parents to destroy the baby in the womb and prevent autistic births from being born. That is genocide, just like what happened to people with Down syndrome. In Iceland, between the years 2008 and 2012, 100% of babies with Down syndrome were aborted. It is not acceptable. The deletion of autistic people from the gene pool is corrupt and reprehensible. It is a human rights violation, and it needs to be dealt with and stopped.
If you look on a 1 to 10 scale, the 10 is the highest functioning child with autism, and if you look at the 1 would be the child with the lowest functionality. There's going to be a range in there that may be 50, 60, 65% or something like that would be eligible to be productive.
Home Depot has many of them. McDonald's has them now.
They have enough processing capability. They have enough physical dexterity. They can, manage sometimes their comorbid medical problem. So we don't have a real good number, but there's a lot. There's at least half of all the people should be able to have some kind of work environment.
Why can't it be 100%, Bob? Maybe you're just not creating opportunities. Do you think maybe that could be the problem? Sitting in your chair as a privileged billionaire? I wonder. And also, it's very misleading to rate us on a scale of 1 to 10 because the autism spectrum is not linear. It's more like a color wheel. Because even for people like me, for example, I have difficulty maintaining a conversation back and forth with people. And it took me until I was 23 years old to make myself a burger. So calling someone high-functioning disregards our challenges, and calling someone low-functioning disregards their humanity. But of course, he probably was not presented with that knowledge or just didn't care.
What would you be doing if you weren't working here?
If I wasn't working here, I would be sitting at home.
Why?
I applied so many jobs and they won't hire me.
Now see, there's the problem right there. No one will hire him because he's autistic. If people would hire, why don't they just train the person on the spot? It doesn't make any sense. Our economic system is extremely flawed. And I think everyone deserves a job if they want it. Even if companies have to be forced to hire them, if that's what it takes, then good. Because everyone who's disabled deserves to be working if that's what they want to do. And if they don't, then they should certainly have the right to be taken care of.
Why isn't more money being put into research to find the causes of autism when it's more common than things like diabetes and AIDS and cancer? The ratio of money going to find cures for those disorders compared to autism is embarrassing. If we don't begin to figure out how to identify the cause and begin to prevent this disorder, or at least intervene earlier in life so we can alter the lifetime course, it's going to cost society a tremendous more amount of money than it's going to cost by being proactive and addressing it now.
Have you ever thought about a cure for that terrible bow tie? And really, just like I Am Autism, I'm not going to go into that one again. He compares autism to diabetes, AIDS, and cancer, which he's a scientist, so I would expect him to know that those things kill people. Autism doesn't kill. I don't know how many times I have to reiterate that in these videos, because there is absolutely no comparison whatsoever. Those diseases need research, of course, because they're fatal. Autism is not fatal. We live the same amount of years as the average human being. So obviously there's a reason why those disorders have greater priorities than autism does, because we are perfectly fine the way we are, save for a couple co-occurring conditions like seizures. If you could figure that out, then yes, I would be totally on board. I think every autistic person I know would agree with me on that. If you can show me someone who enjoys their seizures, please tell me, but I can't find a single one who does. But you're not looking for those things. You're looking at how to prevent autism. You said it yourself. I want to show you a clip from a 1937 eugenics film. Just a warning, there will be some ableist language in the clip.
Once they have been born, defectives are happier and more useful in these institutions than when at large. But it would have been better by far, for them and for the rest of the community, if they had never been born.
Sound familiar? That narrator is also Julian Huxley, who is the brother of Aldous Huxley, the writer of Brave New World and Doors of Perception. So, yeah. Listen closely to how Dr. McDougall talks about autistic people costing society. I'm going to show you a little image that will give you a bit of a visual representation of what this doctor is talking about here. That's right. That was from Adolf Hitler. Notice how the picture is depicting the disabled person as costing the same price as the family on the right, an Aryan family. I cannot speak German, but what it looks like is with those numbers is they're looking at like the price of how much it costs to take care of a disabled person, and that they're a burden. It's basically the same thing that this doctor is talking about. Instead of trying to help us, as he should, he's trying to figure out how to wipe autistic people out. And he said himself that he wants to prevent it. He doesn't look at us as a group of human beings. He sees us as test subjects. A group of test subjects that are unworthy of life. I'm going to read you an excerpt of an article from 2017 talking about the Holocaust Memorial Day, on covering disabled people. Along with millions of Jewish people, gay people, Romani gypsies, and black people, those with physical, mental, and learning disabilities were brutally murdered by the Nazis throughout the Second World War. In 1933, when Adolf Hitler took charge of the party, he legalized the sterilization of those with physical disabilities, mental health needs, and chronic illnesses, accompanied by a carefully orchestrated propaganda campaign which painted disabled people as a drain on society. Does that sound familiar? And with Autism Speaks' documentaries and advertisements that I've discussed, it basically is a carefully orchestrated propaganda campaign which paints disabled people as a drain on society, because those old advertisements don't look at anything positive about us. It looks at the negative. So, all in all, you see where the inspiration's coming from? The problem here is not with autistic people. It's with our system, which fails to help its most vulnerable people. As a reference, in 2013, when this documentary came out, the budget for defense spending was $614.8 billion, while Medicaid was $449.4 billion. For the defense budget, that is way too high. If you would slash that in half and put it towards Medicaid, every autistic person would have had caregivers taking care of them and would be able to have affordable housing provided to them. But instead, our country is very concerned on drone strikes in Afghanistan for a very, in my opinion, pointless war, but that's not what this video is about. I should also mention that around that same time, Obama released a $100 million brain science initiative, which I've already covered in my Autism Speaks video, and that was used as a way to find research to prevent autism. It was kind of a waste of money since they still haven't found that cause 8 years later. So that could have gone towards services, but it was all for naught.
In the United States now, 1 in 5 children have some neurodevelopmental disorder. 1 in 5, 20% of our children have a neurodevelopmental disorder. I don't understand what's causing that, and many of these do seem to be on the rise. So to my mind, autism is a bellwether. It's the canary, and it is signaling that there may be factors that we don't understand that are affecting our children. I think by understanding what's causing autism, we're going to be understanding what causes many of the neurodevelopmental disorders that plague children in our country and across the world.
No, Dr. Admiral, that's where you're wrong, because a lot of the issues that we have would not exist if we were properly accommodated and cared for like we should be. It doesn't plague us. Perhaps you plague us by trying to figure out these solutions. In other words, trying to detect autism in the womb. Because with that power that you wield, it will lead to disastrous consequences for us all and for future generations. And people need to know what you do.
My hopes and dreams are something that I kind of keep to myself because I don't want to have my daughter and all of us disappointed if something doesn't work out as well as it should. I also think, my God, Christian, you're changing the world. You have made a difference in autism.
Yeah, maybe you should keep those hopes and dreams to yourself, but you haven't. You've made them quite public. You've made it quite clear that you want us to be cured and to not be allowed to be who we are. And guess what? You're dead now. You're in the ground. We're still standing. So, in a way, we won. Sure, maybe Christian's diagnosis has changed the world, but not for our benefit. It's for your benefit. Because all you've ever wanted is for your life to be more convenient, because the existence of autistic people is a burden for you. But your dream never came to pass, thankfully. Of course, Christian is not to blame for any of this here. He's one of us. But the image that you put to the public out of him paints us as monsters, as diseased, as burdens that need to be eliminated. So the poor kid will have to live the rest of his life as a poster child for a eugenicist organization. And that's a very hard burden for him to carry. And for the rest of us. While Autism Speaks seems to be on the more passive side of eugenics, trying to do things in the future, Canada is trying to pass legislation that'll just straight up allow doctors to kill patients with their consent. They have a program called MAID, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying, and disability rights organizations are quite angry about that. I'm going to share with you some excerpts from an article titled "Disability Filibuster Against Bill C7 Goes On Despite Being Zoom Bombing," with graphic images. This article covers murder and suicide, so just a warning beforehand. Many don't have access to home care, dental care isn't covered, many aids and medications are also not covered. We don't have universal mental health care. These things need to be funded and made accessible before a second track to MAID is made broadly available, they said. Last month, the UN Human Rights Council's Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities gave a Senate committee a similar critique. The Council was concerned the bill was undermining disabled people's autonomy and their capacity to make the right decisions via subtle pressure being brought to bear by, for example, lack of services or lack of community living options. Lawrence also added, Many of us have already had experiences of going to the hospital and rather than getting treatment, were offered a do not resuscitate order. On Tuesday night, writer Monica Gartner, who uses a wheelchair and has a condition where her bones break or fracture easily, echoed this in her online testimonial. She described how, during a hospital trip for a broken arm, a nurse whispered in her ear that she could fly away if she wanted to. Filibuster is activism for our era. We are isolated and separated, but we are also united and together, Filibuster creator Catherine Frazee said in a news release. Sarah Jama, the lead organizer with Disability Justice Network of Ontario, DJNO, and one of the speakers, said the digital filibuster was a necessary measure during the pandemic. Busloads of disabled people arriving in Ottawa to block the passage of this bill are not an option, she said in a press release. But sitting on the sidelines while the federal government votes on a bill that so directly and dangerously impacts the lives of disabled people is also not an option. Lawrence acknowledges that the passage of Bill C-7 is highly likely, but that they and others fully intend on moving forward with court cases and legal action. We want to make sure disabled people know we're together in this, and we will keep fighting it even if it is passed. I want to read another perspective of a disability rights advocate, and this time it's Nancy Hansen. Bill C-7 sickens me at my very core and calls into question my worth and validity as a human being. It is a substantive manifestation of the tentative nature of my social positioning that can be swept away in an instant. Ableism is percolating just below the surface. Much of what is known about disability in the public domain is drawn from myth, misconception, fear, and ignorance. Disability is not a fate worse than death. Why is it easier to access medical assistance in dying in many jurisdictions than supports and services to live with dignity? There is no more than a little irony here. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is not a simple turn of phrase. It takes work and a serious shift in perspective. It is certainly not a fast track to death. Bill C-7 in its current form sets the stage for another court challenge. It is 2021, and it is profoundly disturbing that I am having to justify my experience. We must move beyond simplistic, one-dimensional understandings of disability. She hit the nail on the head. We should not have to prove our existence, and the fact that we're still having to do that in 2021 is unacceptable. Also, one thing to think about, although it doesn't explicitly state that autistic people are being targeted in the bill, it does say that people can, if the bill is passed, be considered for MAID just for having a mental illness and disabilities, and I'm sure that would extend to autistic people as well. Think about high support needs people who can't speak or are intellectually disabled. The caregivers can basically use that against them by telling the doctor to take their life, and if those caregivers had guardianship over the person, there's nothing that autistic can do about it, and their blood is on the caregiver's hands, and it could have been easily prevented. Legislation like this is scary and almost as bad as Nazi Germany. It really is. If you made it this far, I do truly appreciate you sticking around. If there's any topics you'd like me to cover in the future, definitely please leave a comment down below. And if you enjoy this video and like to see more material, definitely please like and subscribe. Hope you have a good night.